Well, there's no shortage of things that are breaking down right now. The world that we've become used to in the last 50 to 70 years is going away in the first half of this decade. The two big trends, deglobalization, so any sort of global supply chain or global import that is necessary to maintain whatever it is you care about is going to change, and countries and companies that can be on the front end of that can profit, and everyone else is kind of screwed. The second big piece is depopulation. We're still hearing stories about 10 billion people and overpopulation, how we're going to feed everybody, but that's just not in the cards. With industrialization and urbanization over the last 70 years, family sizes have gotten smaller and smaller and smaller to the point that in most of the world, we're already below replacement levels, including in most of the developing world. And in the 2020s is when we have a huge mass of people, the baby boomers, the last big generation that were born in the advanced world, move into retirement. And they had fewer children, and then they had fewer children. And so we are actually looking at a population bomb this decade. And since everything we know about economics is based on the pie getting a little bit bigger every year, we don't even have an economic theory of how to wrestle with that.
Yeah, I mean, the Pope is even chiding people for having pets instead of children.
Exactly. Have kids, not pets.
That's right. But so what are people worrying about, but maybe shouldn't be worrying about right now?
Well, I would argue that most people are at least now starting to realize that there's some bigger issues. They might be worried about the tip of the iceberg rather than the iceberg, but I still see this as a plus. So a couple great examples. What is going on in Kazakhstan and Ukraine right now? We've got two post-Soviet republics that are trying to figure out what it means to be a post-Soviet republic. Ukraine is going in the direction of democracy, to which the Russians say niet, and the Kazakhs are going in the direction of full totalitarianism, which the Russians think are great, and they've already deployed troops. That impacts uranium, oil, natural gas, corn, metals. That hits the base supply lines for a lot of materials upon which a lot of countries in the wider world, especially in East Asia, depend. So we're seeing these depopulation and deglobalization trends breaking down the security parameters in multiple parts of the world. And every time a supply chain or an input comes out of these zones, it is then threatened. China, Taiwan is another good example. 3/4 of the world's manufacturing supply chain steps are involved in the East Asian Rim, completely transported by water. You get a naval war over there, it ends.
So then, how does the pandemic fit into this? And what are the lessons of the interconnectedness that the pandemic's teaching us?
Not friendly lessons. What the pandemic has really done is speed up everything. So what was supposed to, wrong phraseology, what was probably going to unfold over the next 10 to 15 years is now unfolding in like a 5 to 6 year period, of which we're already 2 years into. We originally faced a populism, a trade, a labor opposition to free trade. And we saw that in Donald Trump, and we're seeing that in Joe Biden. We now have a national security and a health opposition to international dependencies. And so you're seeing huge efforts in Europe and North America to reshore as much of their industrial plant from East Asia as they can. So that's kind of piece one. Piece two is China itself. China's devolved into a full cult of personality. There's one person at the top, Chairman Xi, who makes the decisions, and he has literally shot the messenger who has brought him bad news so many times that nobody wants to bring him accurate information anymore. So here we've got a country where their financial system is broken beyond repair. We've got a country where their demographic inversion is happening so rapidly that we now think, according to Chinese data, that their population actually peaked 15 years ago. Yeah. And we're just well into the population collapse. But Xi can't get information to make decisions. On top of that, the Chinese vaccine for COVID functionally doesn't work, especially versus Delta and Omicron. So the only tool they have in their toolbox to maintain national legitimacy for the Communist Party is health now. And that means lockdowns. That's their only tool. So China is no longer seeing participation in global supply chains as something that guarantees legitimacy for the party. all that's left is lockdowns. And in that sort of environment, anyone who is still dependent upon Chinese manufacturing is about to get hosed.
Wow. Yeah. America seems to have a distinct and a clear strategy about China. Canada, as you know, is a bit stuck on this issue. Doesn't really understand what might be the wisest course of engagement with China, given our status in the world, given that we're not even really a middle power much anymore. What do you think is the wisest course?
Well, first of all, thank you for saying about the United States. I disagree. The idea that there's a clear and concise policy out of Washington on anything right now is kind of a reach. Thank you.
Okay. Well, let me say comparably clearer.
Fair enough. Yeah. There are a lot of things about the Trudeau administration that I think are a little quirky. This isn't one of them. Now, the thing to remember about the relationship between Canada and the wider world is it's a subset of the relationship between Canada and the United States and then the Canadian provinces among themselves. Yeah. Canada didn't have its first internal free trade agreement among the provinces until 2 years ago. I mean, you want to talk about late on the stick. And then the Canadians have always tried to get as many exemptions to American trade law as possible because they don't want to be, in bed with the elephant when it rolls over. I get it. But what that means is that Canada has deliberately broken up trade relationships among itself and with its largest trading partner in order to maintain a degree of political independence. I get it. But it means that Canada can never achieve an economy of scale. Mm-hmm. And in that environment, we saw the mass deindustrialization of China over the course of the last 50 years, which meant that if China was going to retain a position of relevance and affluence, and it can't do it in manufacturing, it has to do it as connective tissue. And so whether it's St. John's or Vancouver, Canada absorbs huge amounts of imports from the wider world and then distributes them in North America. There's value add. I don't mean to suggest that there's not, but Canada is not a manufacturing power. Canada is a manufacturing appendage to other manufacturing powers. In a globalized system where the pie gets bigger, that works. We're not in that world anymore. So if you break down global supply chains, those super ports that you have on the Atlantic and Pacific fringes suddenly have a lot less business, whereas the Americans and the Mexicans get down to the big business of building out their manufacturing system internally. And if Canada doesn't change their policy very quickly, they're simply going to be left out.
I've seen some interest in the new book that you've got coming in May, and its argument around the arrival, I guess, and the need for a kind of a greater self-reliance. Are we as a country here, do you think, in the right track on that one?
Oh, well, absolutely not. The Trudeau administration right now should be working on manufacturing across the provinces, should be breaking down the barriers among the provinces. And that means, among other things, that the prairie provinces have to be allowed, encouraged to do more themselves. And since the prairie provinces, demographically speaking, are the youngest and are paying the most into Canada in order to support the aging populations in Eastern Canada, that's politically, that's a non-starter in Ottawa. You also would need to finally, hopefully permanently, break down the barriers between Ontario and Quebec. And as we all know, that is like the story of Canada going back to the beginning. It is easier for the individual provinces of Canada to integrate with the United States, but that still requires a change in policy out of Ottawa. And right now, there seems to be this desperation in Ottawa to hang on to the structures that they have fought for 60 years to build. I get it. The sunk costs are huge. And successfully adapting to these changes means giving up what historically has made Canada special. It's the age-old question of politics versus economics. This is not an easy discussion to have. Yeah, but to this point, Canada hasn't started the discussion. That's a problem.
But hasn't the pandemic at least warned us again about our systems? When you take a look at the way in which treatment and restrictions and advice even has been imparted across a country. You can see it in the United States, obviously, between the federal and the state systems. In Canada, you can see it at a federal and a provincial level. Are we learning nothing from the pandemic that would help us?
The problem with judging favorably or harshly from that criteria is that this was a novel device, a novel virus. I mean, it's in the name, novel coronavirus. It's evolved meaningfully 5 times.